Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar, European e-invoicing 101, essential updates on the ViDA proposals in collaboration between ITR and Vertex, the tax compliance solutions provider. My name is Phil Myers, I'm the commercial editor of ITR and I'm delighted to be joined by Gunjan Tripathi. She's the Director of Solutions Marketing at Vertex and a highly experienced chartered tax advisor who specialises in European VAT. So today you'll hear all about the latest progress updates as Europe moves towards implementation of the VAT in the digital age reforms. Gunjan will provide insights on the three pillars of reform under the ViDA proposals and the latest legislative changes concerning e-invoicing. And just like to say thank you to those who noted which jurisdictions are of particular interest when registering. Gunjan will be providing updates on certain countries and regions later. Just a few housekeeping points before I hand over. There'll be a Q&A session after Gunjan's presentation of about half an hour with the opportunity to raise questions throughout this webinar. Also, I'm afraid the slides from today's webinar will not be available to download, but a recording can be viewed on demand by heading to the ITR website, www.internationaltaxreview.com, and that will be available shortly after the event. ITR's webinar archive is also available through the link below, and you'll also find a link to Vertex's page on the ITR site, which features a series of articles on a range of tax topics, with new content added regularly. Finally, if you experience any technical difficulties, just refresh your window and this should correct it. Now, over to you, Gunjan, and I believe you'll also be introducing a poll.
Yes, please. So thanks for a great introduction, Phil. I would also like to get to know our audience and customers this morning who are attending, which is actually the intention of the poll, to get it started first and foremost, and then that way we'll make sure we weave through for the language that is relevant for you as we progress. So if we could have the polling question now, that would be great.
Yep, that's available now.
Perfect. So it basically asks for the area of business that you most associate yourself with, whether it be around tax or technology or accounting and finance and so on and so forth. We'll keep the poll open for about another 10-15 seconds. I'll take a quick understanding of how we are doing this morning on the audience that way. But while you have that, a quick refresher on ViDA that has been in discussion as the VAT in digital age. It is still a proposal. It has not been stamped and sealed by member states or the EU Commission yet. The intention was to have all parts of the proposal with its three pillars approved together so that it could become a law in all the member states within the EU. So to modernize and to make EU VAT system work better for businesses and with more resilience for fraud, towards fraud, and to improve transparency in reporting with digitalization were the core intentions behind these pieces. The interesting piece that has really caught most businesses up at night, wondering what is next, is of course the digital reporting obligations, those that are intertwined with the electronic invoicing. But it also impacts other sectors, such as those on the platform economy, as more sectors are deemed to be added with the deemed supplier regulations, such as those that were introduced at the back of 2020. And last but not the least, providing more holistic opportunities for small and medium businesses to utilize a single VAT registration across numerous member states, thereby allowing themselves on some lower admin. That was a quick snapshot of what the proposals were by the end of 2022. And as you can imagine, with these many number of member states debating its pros, cons, and application to their respective jurisdictions, that this has not been an easy ride in reaching consensus. I'm going to just pause quickly to make sure we have now closed the poll, Phil. And if we can see the results quickly, that would be amazing. If not, we can crack on.
Sure. Yes, so I've just closed the poll, and we have, as you might expect, the largest proportion is for tax with 66%, and then we have finance with 26% and 6% in the other category.
Perfect. Well, okay, I'll stick to my tax geeky bit for the most of the part then. So moving on, what is the current state of these legislative changes and what's really happening? So surprise, surprise, even at the end of October 2023, the countries at the very least have unanimously said, although this is a non-binding vote, that there will be at least a year's delay to all the ViDA pillars. And actually, coincidentally, today is one of the days that the ECOFIN's working party meets to have a revised timetable set and to discuss the extensions of import one-stop shop in regards to customs duties, which was another area that got added to the discussion since looking at how good the proposals and their intentions were for VAT. After today's meeting, we should hear a bit more about where the discussion went, so that can still not be part of mine today. Do not have a crystal ball yet. But if all goes to plan, 14th of May is when all approvals are supposed to come together in time for next year's movements. So in essence, all pillars are now being also discussed separately from each other. So the one around electronic invoicing and digital reporting has definitely seen the most significant delay proposals. What was intended to be harmonized by 2028 is now looking more like 2030 or possibly even 32. And some of the main reasons cited for some of these have been around the preparation time and lead time that is needed for both businesses and for tax authorities to have infrastructure, especially IT, that which is tested, reliable, and has good information capabilities, processing powers, and security features enabled to ensure that sensitive data about businesses is being passed on in a secure fashion. Moving on to the pillar 2, I think most member states seem to be in agreement, and yet, as we said, both pillar 2 and 3 have not been quite stamped and sealed on either. So that includes the digital, adding more players, sectors such as short-term rentals to the likes of marketplaces rules, and then having single VAT registration extensions. So let's deep dive into a bit more as to what's happening around Pillar 1. So Pillar 1 is often associated with electronic invoicing, although it is not the whole sole or the only way that electronic invoicing has taken effect. As we are aware, Italy has been well ahead in line and with due derogation from the European Commission. Now, what is happening interestingly is that while everybody awaits this go-live date, a lot of member states are also making movements with their own legislation, hoping to converge with the 28th or now 2030 regulations. But in the interim, there is still need for derogation from the EU, and the debate is also on to whether they should still be the case or if that sort of prerequisite should be dropped. The other interesting thing that has been really revealed is that while electronic invoicing was supposedly understood to have a lot of information whereby it makes sense to have checks such as, is the VAT rate right? Is it the right rate for the product categorization or not? Such sorts of checks were not part of the original plan, i.e. it would have been just around reporting and real-time reporting of invoice-related data in an electronic manner often with clearance with the tax authorities. Whereas now the discussions are to be had around whether this pan-EU scheme needs to include at least some versions of validations on the electronic invoice data that the tax authorities will receive. Now, you can imagine this puts a lot of a redesign and rethink in some of the architecture that has been thought upon so far. The other area that was really an area where the businesses, when the consultations have been on, whether they be at national level or at member state levels, has been around the number of days within which these transactions should be reported on electronic formats or e-reporting formats. And businesses really urge the tax authorities to consider that a 2-day deadline was simply not feasible. More so on the AP side for the incoming invoices, because often just processing incoming invoices, cross-checking them can take much longer than that. And then you have the realities of life, such as weekends, business processing days, bank holidays, a lot of things that can kick in that genuinely impact these deadlines. So the discussion and open item is now requesting this to be extended to 10 days at least. And often businesses have argued that that is the difference between them being able to be compliant versus just plain and simple ending up being non-compliant due to delays. The other option that is really under discussion in amongst various others. By the way, when the first debate was being had, there were over 300 items. I have picked up some of those that would be of most interest to the audience today. But the EU Commission approval on e-invoicing continues to be under discussion. And last but not the least, the businesses have also urged the EC to consider dropping their reservations for summary invoices. So the long story short is that summary invoices are again something very useful employed by businesses to consolidate regular trade with their business counterparts, for which they often have consolidated summary invoices. And under these new regulations, it was envisaged that these would be done away with, again, creating a need for a much larger number of invoices than they are known today or understood today. And this would have, again, further impacted businesses' ability to report in a speedy fashion with all the details anticipated from them. So again, this is something that has been requested not to be proceeded with. Moving on, I'm going to take a step further into some of the countries where there is more information that has begun to surface in light of these digital reporting requirements that necessitated them to be ready to a certain degree. So top of the chart here, in not necessarily any alphabetic order, is the ones that have had the maximum number of news articles and hits on it. So from my perspective, Romania has been in news for quite some time, and what has been interesting is that they are proceeding with a dual-phased approach, whereby as of January, they are adopting e-reporting this year and are still geared towards a mandatory e-invoicing as of 1st of July this year. However, if you read the detailed commentaries that have come out, this is still a maybe, so we don't know if closer to the time the authorities mention any last-minute changes, delays, or areas of not penalizing businesses for slight delays in their ability to meet the requirements. Similarly, Romania has done it for e-reporting as well, whereby the penalty period is actually not starting for e-reporting as the 1st of January. It's actually a few months later onwards. giving businesses time to settle in to the reporting requirement. Poland has been the other one that has been in the news for almost going live this year. And at the very end of December, early January, we heard further delays with no clear dates for the new piece of legislation around go live. So that adds a lot of uncertainty for businesses who have been on a constant start-stop journey of understanding what it is that they need to be compliant with and by when. I share the frustration of the taxpayers and also that of service providers trying to help with these start-stop uncertainties. France also has introduced, or shall we rather say, reintroduced their deadlines, and they have broken it up between large and medium businesses versus small and medium businesses for go live dates. Again, just to make sure that it is the maximum volume of transactions and value transactions that are being captured first and foremost. So as things stand today, it's the September 1st, 2026 that we are looking at for large businesses in France to go live. I'm also aware that some of the testing portals of France are available in limited capacity for businesses to plan ahead where they have domestic entities that can work with the authorities to test ahead of time. Spain, as an extension to their existing SII, which is a format of e-reporting, is also expected with further delays with at least July 2024. But the interesting thing with Spain is that while they seem quite ready for 1st of July, they still need that derogation approval from the European Commission, which has still not been completed. So they await that. Germany, again, is also thinking of various ways of having phased approaches in which to bring its businesses and different parts of the jurisdiction to work holistically together. So the first and foremost is that, again, the movement from what was anticipated as 2025 next year has been confirmed to be at least 2026 onwards. There's actually a lot of details into the German format as to which regions, what type of segments will go first or second, and this keeps constantly evolving. For the sake of simplicity, I've kept it as headline as possible. And last but not the least, Belgium also continues to work its way through structured e-invoicing, and they intend to make sure they go live by 2026. I think they are, again, furthest ahead, whereby they await their final European Commission derogation to come through while they have finalized the local bill and moved it onwards for local assent by their king. So these are some of the ones that are available, and I'm aware of many more that continue, but we're going to quickly go back onto the other two pillars of ViDA to complete the loop on this one today. So what's happening on pillar 2, which is all around platform economy. So the ask was to have smaller businesses exempted from these digital platform economy supplier obligations. And then there's also been debates on the definitions of rentals that should or shouldn't be included in these platform economy laws. So about reduction of 15 days from 45 days to 31 days is what is under current open suggestions. So just a reminder for everyone here, we all are aware that often the platform providers who were facilitating various marketplaces for sales of goods, for example, is now being extended to short-term rentals of both accommodation as well as passenger transportation. And all of these definitely have a lot of weeds to go through in terms of definitions as well. But member states seem to be aligned on having these go ahead. One of the biggest reasons, of course, being that these are the new ways in which emerging businesses, the gig economy, is challenging the existing brick and mortar or established hospitality and transport industry. And therefore, these regulations around VAT are to help level the playing field and to remove any undue advantage for the upcoming sectors from a price point. Because if I, as a consumer, have two very different tax points, sometimes 20 or 27% apart, simply because of tax, then it's not quite the level playing field that the policies aim for. So that was a quick snapshot on where the platform economy stuff is. Last but not the least, if we move on to the pillar 3, which is all about extending the one-stop shop, which are the registrations, allowing you as a small and medium business to have responsibility and accountability only via a single member state tax authority. So the discussions here are being had that there should be some provisions here that were previously not discussed, or although they were discussed, it makes sense to drop them just because that they are either too complicated to track or do not have a very profound impact on the numbers either. So first of all, the extension of the deemed supplier for marketplaces on EU's local seller trade is a provision that is expected to be dropped. The other area of discussion is that mandating import one-stop shop for consignment is to be postponed, and the reason is because the customs reform, similar to VAT in digital age and e-registration based, are also something that are under discussion. So it makes sense to make sure they converge and are introduced together when we know where we want to be with the custom reforms as well around these. And last but not the least, again, something which is typically low value, low volume trade around secondhand goods and work of art are other pieces that are being dated to be dropped from these EU single registration remit. There are, of course, quite a few other debates that are also being had, such as will they allow for input tax recovery? Would it allow for amendments, submissions, etc.? So these real practical impact, which are related to the input side of the VAT to keep it neutral, are still points of contention. And until some of these are settled, we're looking at a bit more time towards the finalization of these. So actually, that was a quick whistle-stop tour. And Phil, we're a bit ahead of our time, but we could open up for questions if we have had any.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Gunjan. There's a lot to go through there, and thanks for bringing us up to speed. We have had some questions in, and we'll kick off with, in your opinion, Gunjan, what challenges and opportunities might businesses face as they transition to e-invoicing, considering the varied pace of its adoption across different regions, as you mentioned there?
Sure. So I think, in my opinion, with all these delays, rather than pushing our internal carts for dealing with these as they come in, there is a small window of opportunity for businesses to really take control of their data and processes as they stand today. I always urge businesses to make sure that they have good documentation of their various supply chains, various data elements that they today capture, whether it be for seller or customer onboarding, or around their general ways in which they are doing business, or adapting omni-channel or marketplace ways to extend their aisles indefinitely. And all of these, while they create an exciting business opportunity, should not have tax as a complete afterthought, because it's going to have a great domino effect in the next year or so onwards, when numerous countries will switch on slightly different, varying degrees of mandates. And at that point, going back to drawing board to understand your typical data variances and their trends and where are the weaknesses in them, will actually leave businesses in a bit of a firefighting situation with these mandates going live. So while it's a bit frustrating already being unable to test these systems as they are still quite far ahead from going live, but I think it often makes sense to test your data against some of the existing mandates, such as the Spanish SII or the Italian reporting purposes, just from, again, a perspective of poking holes and seeing that, do I even have all that data points per transaction that I will be needed in future to report? As long as it lives within my system today, or I'm capturing it, then I'm in a better position to be able to report it in a few months down the line, rather than starting from scratch and scrambling to find out, oh, I actually don't even capture that today. I think that will be my biggest takeaway from all these various uncertain deadlines from the authorities.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, taking note of the guidelines that are already in place and testing against those. With regard to the domino effects you mentioned there, that leads us on to our next question, and extending it beyond the EU members. Next question is, for businesses that transact globally and are based in the UK or the US, where e-invoicing hasn't been made mandatory yet, what steps should they be taking now to prepare for this European shift towards e-invoicing?
Let's take a couple of examples. US, for example, in certain states is testing ahead of the time from a commercial angle with electronic invoicing to understand if this would help bring speed and effectiveness to their business models. So the Business Payment Coalition in the US is spearheading those discussions. Similarly, there are debates that are being had in even places like UK if this should be considered. And with Making Tax Digital already extending the line of sight of businesses and ability to audit from a tax authority perspective, means that, again, ultimately, it's all about having more data than has ever been used and processed for tax purposes. And it stems from the fact that both the tax authorities as well as the entire business segments are now more technologically advanced than they were 5 or 10 years ago. So the appetite and ambitions of consuming this data for the purposes of business efficiencies as well as tax reporting and collection speed is only natural. We often also would have hoped that tax authorities had a bit more harmonization in their requests for these schemas, but ultimately they are each bound by their own IT legacy systems, just the way businesses are bound by their own ERP methodologies. And therefore, in all these, again, it kind of goes back to the previous question that I was referring to, that you may not have perfect data, but at least knowing exactly where the imperfections of your data are will give you an opportunity to have better conversations with your advisors, system integrators, ERP teams, as well as finally, if ever needed, with the tax authorities to demonstrate that you as a business have done the best possible in the given time frames to help meet these various deadlines that are popping up everywhere. And preparation-wise, again, it's about making sure you find a business partner that you're willing to work and understand some of these regulations and its impact. Because the other very interesting thing that's happening is not all countries are going live for each and every transaction type. Some would go live with just business to government, as we have seen in the past. Italy did a phased approach, then brought in B2B, and yet nobody is in Europe, for example, is headed towards B2C, but a preliminary glimpse of those things are beginning to show up in APAC and LATAM countries. So it's all a matter of time in terms of how much technology is enabled at our tax authorities and ultimately.
Okay. So again, I think that leads us into the next question quite nicely. It's time to reach for the crystal ball, I think, Gunjan. Having sifted through the 300 odd discussion items you mentioned earlier, we have a question in some countries are already starting to implement different models of e-invoicing, as you just said. When do you expect ViDA to happen? That's a biggie.
I think the grand plans, personally speaking, of having all the ViDA proposals go through and take effect simultaneously is the part of the puzzle for me that is beginning to break apart. So I still am of the opinion that pillars 2 and 3, which are actually less invasive to the tax authorities themselves, stand a better chance of going live from next year onwards, even potentially. But the political will that is needed to put in place an invoicing system which is as harmonized as it can get is going to be the biggest challenge in executing the pillar 1 of ViDA. Not to mention that the way in which it is being proposed means that the countries that already have a version of electronic invoicing mandates operational today might have to unravel as they stand today, or might have to drastically change their models from 2-corner, 3-corner down to 4 or 5 corners that we often talk about in the world of, okay, what's the transaction flowing at? That will again also create a lot of political debate and dissent around these topics, in my opinion, because again, it means resources that have been put to use in certain prospects are or will be required to be undone before they can be harmonized all the way over again. So I think it's the same story that we have for VAT rates, or for why Intrastat reportings are different, or why SAFT is not very harmonized in its application across the countries. I think this living in the weeds and details of nuances of what Hungary needs versus what would Romania or Poland need will be a way of life for European businesses.
Okay, and we're looking at May the 14th for approval. You mentioned earlier, is that a key date in the process?
That is the hope, that if there is any possibility of having this last piece approved, that 14th of May is designated as a meeting date for the ECOFIN Working Party. However, given how many debates have been had already in the past year and a half, we just hope that as much of it as is possible gets aligned. A part of me feels like it may still struggle to get 100% vote of confidence from all the member states.
Okay, it's interesting to have the personal perspective there. Okay, another question in, perhaps you'd like to answer this. What is the scope of the e-invoicing requirements? In particular, do e-invoicing requirements apply to companies without establishments in the EU? If it is not relevant for non-established businesses, then is there a clear definition of establishment?
Yeah, so that's a very fair question. So most of the electronic invoice reporting that is being spoken about for domestic purposes in various member states are actually focused for established businesses in those countries, because the idea is to capture the business-to-business domestic transactions as the first and foremost point of call. The second layer of it would be the business-to-business transactions that are cross-border eventually. So there could be, it is well worth reasoning that if you're a non-established business or you do not engage in B2B or B2G activities in a lot of these countries, then you are potentially out of scope, even if you may be deemed as a large business. So again, another reason why I have often discussed this with our existing customers, that they really need to have a good handle on what are their various operational entities and registrations across various countries. What sort of transactions are they handling today in terms of value, volume, and nature and distinction between B2B, B2B, B2G, and B2C? Because having a holistic snapshot view will help with navigating these definitions as they emerge as well.
Okay, thanks for clearing that up. Still getting questions coming. Who is supposed to be the project manager in this type of project? And it goes back to the poll, I suppose, earlier. IT, supply chain, accounting, tax. Where do you see the responsibility lying there?
Typically, we have seen it as a cross-functional project, just because the range of disciplines that it touches upon within a business. And I think this is the ultimate intention of some of these regulations, is to help break down silos of tax returns and reporting teams and their workspaces. So ultimately, I see it as living somewhere between the finance tax world as strong influencers and those that help show the way of prioritizing which country, which entity first. But ultimately, these processes are incomplete without IT support, those who know the ERP and data as it stands today well, to have all the foundational elements that will go into these reports. Because while it's important that the person signing off these reports, aka the tax team and the finance and accounting team, are comfortable with it, but they are ultimately consuming data that has been generated by the supply team, the logistics team, those that are day-to-day working with ERP, and relying on IT to ensure that this data is complete, is being transferred in a secure manner, because ultimately it is sensitive data for businesses. If you're a listed company, and this is the sort of information that is weighted for every quarterly earnings and those kind of information. So there has to be a lot of thought and comfort from those aspects of businesses before being comfortable that it's working as efficiently as it can from an end-to-end perspective.
Okay, thank you. And that brings us to the end of the questions, and thanks for providing some great answers there, Gunjan, and for bringing us up to speed again. If there's anything you'd like to listen to again, there's a lot of information there. Obviously, the webinar will shortly be available through the ITR website using the link below. And also, I'd just like to add that thank you to Gunjan for providing some great insights, and thank you to everyone watching. And just like to say, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Gunjan. Thank you all.